far as the ongoing budget issues, before I turn it over to Mr. Boyce, a couple things have happened over the past several weeks, and so every meeting now, I want to say probably for the past 2 years or so, I've spoken about the funding issue in the state of New Jersey, and explicitly Senate Bill 2, which changed the way the SFRA was calculated, which is how schools are funded. And on the back end of that was a $30 million reduction to the Freehold Regional High School District. And so last year we lost 1.8 million thereabouts, this year 3.8 million, but next year and the next 2 subsequent years, we estimate that reduction to be somewhere between $6 and $10 million. And I'll let Mr. Boyce get into some more on that. But what that adds up to is an incredibly difficult position for this school district to be in. We've lived lean, we're highly efficient, our cost per pupil is very low. We've drawn down our staff over that time. We have a declining enrollment, about 1 to 1.4% a year, thereabouts. We've reduced about 36 general ed positions since 2014-15, and administrative positions as well. And so we've done the responsible thing. And it puts us into a very difficult position. And so now the budget, the way that the budget works in New Jersey is the governor will give his budget address at the end of this month, and then we'll receive our state aid notice within about 48 hours. And so we've been advocating directly to Governor Murphy to intervene in some way in the situation. And for folks who've paid attention, we put out an online petition that garnered about 13,000 signatures and comments. And we wrote an open letter to the governor as well, outlining some of the situations here in Freehold Regional. But I think perhaps the most significant part of that letter was looking at a Freehold Regional household in 2009 and an income of $100,000 with a $400,000 home paid somewhere around $4,100 in school taxes in 2009. 10 years later, a $400,000 home and a $100,000 income pays $5,300 in school taxes in Freehold Regional footprint. What that is that the district's ability to pay, as outlined by the state, has been, in our estimation, artificially inflated. It puts us in a very difficult position, and I'll let Mr. Boyce get into some of the nuances of that. So we're going to continue to advocate as vocally as possible, and that includes a lawsuit, taking the state of New Jersey to court, the Department of Ed explicitly, to release the formula of how they determine this. Joining a group called Support Our Students that's comprised of about 95 other districts across the state losing state aid, advocating with that group. I chair the legislative arm of that committee, and we've been working sort of tirelessly, and putting out all sorts of information, meeting with our elected officials and our state legislators over and over again, repeatedly, our municipal officials as well. Over the past 2 weeks, Mr. Boyce and I have been meeting with all the township administrators just to discuss with them what some of this might look like for our district. The board president, Mr. Acetola, myself, Mr. Boyce, thank Senator Gopal for his time. He met with us a couple weeks ago, and we had a very, very productive conversation with him as well, and we're hopeful that there might be some movement on legislation that might offset some of these reductions. But at this point in time, the district is facing 3 straight years of somewhere between $6 and $10 million in reduction after we've already been cut the past 2 years. So that's a significant impact, and I don't want to understate it, because it's going to have a devastating impact on our ability to deliver the same sort of program that we have for the children in these communities. And so everyone in the audience, I would ask that you continue to advocate, continue to educate yourself. We have an entire webpage that really explains the situation, explains what you can do as a parent, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, and clearly outlines sort of the process in how some of this is determined. And it goes as far back as 2017. We were testifying before the Senate Ed Committee and the Senate Assembly Committee saying this is going to be devastating to our school system. And so we've been out in front of this, but now it's here. And so the work that is ahead of us is to continue to advocate and to continue to move forward. And with that said, Mr. Boyce, I'll turn it over to you for a more specific financial update.
Yeah, so Board, as we've done for the last couple meetings and will continue to do, I want to keep you up to date on the status of the budget development. Just a couple of spin-off comments from Dr. Sampson's. The process of artificially inflating a community's ability to pay has another purpose to it, because the higher that number is, the less the state has to pay. So that's why it's happening. And in Mr. Sampson's example, it's not going to make sense to any regular citizen that if my home has a fair market value of 400 and my household income is 100, then 10 years later with the same scenario, suddenly I have the ability to pay another $1,000, $4,000 to $5,000. So that just, I think that kind of micro example really brings home what the actual impact is. So S2 is going to be something that I want to talk about here, but later in my comments I'm going to make a very, very strong distinction between S2 and infrastructure projects recently offered through referendum. S2, although we continue to vigorously advocate for changes to S2, and we offer different ideas of how to smooth that with understanding the legislators' position and what they will need to be able to, what they find palatable to live with, we still need to continue to prepare for what is currently on the books. So when we talk about $6 million to $10 million, just to put that in context, it's a $200 million annual budget for the district right now. So 6 to 10 million is a significant reduction in revenue. The other component of that is that on the expenditure side, costs do go up. So to the extent they do go up, add that to the total problem that needs to be handled on the appropriation side. So what we've done is we've selected two primary areas that can have significant dollar returns on them. And as we've discussed before, one of them is courtesy busing and one of them is participation fees. So courtesy busing, which is a quick review, that if you are 2.5 miles from your school, the state does not require busing for those students, even in areas of safety. So that's what we're currently gearing up for. And when you do that, you can't just simply modify existing routes. What it amounts to is redesigning all of the routes. And along the way, we're able to tweak some things that should have been tweaked before, but also institute some new ideas where we're designing them to have more students walk out, more students who are being bused walk out closer to the top of the neighborhood, right? So maybe one street in to the neighborhood rather than driving through those whole neighborhoods, which allows us to be more efficient. Freehold Regional's footprint is 200 square miles, so it's a large area to cover. And we need to deliver kids within a reasonable period of time. An hour and a half on the bus to get to where you could drive to there in 20 minutes is not what we want to do to the students who could use the sleep. So that work is underway. We deliver approximately 12,000 students to and from school, and that includes the vocational programs, it includes out-of-district placements for special needs programs. As far as within our schools, it's about 10,000, and approximately 30% of that, 3,000 students, are within the 2.5 miles. So it's another thing that when in our meetings with each municipal administrator that we've had is to talk about the involvement of their police department as we work through traffic control, the logistics of that, because there's going to be a lot more traffic in front of our schools there. So as that work is underway, another component of it, other than reducing just the annual costs for contractors and or our own forces, is that we can greatly reduce the number of buses that we buy. So buses have a useful life of 12, it can be extended to 15 in some circumstances, but eventually they age out and you simply can't use them anymore under state law as a school bus. So of the 13 54 passenger buses that are due, and we have approximately 140 school vehicles. So of the 50 big buses, 54 passengers, of the 13 of those that are due, we are not replacing any. And of the vans, we are replacing 3 instead of 6. So there's also that savings, along with insurance and gasoline and those types of residual maintenance, those types of residual. So with the newly designed routes, the Transportation Department is running them, which is a best practice to make sure that, you know, what they've done on a screen actually makes sense in the moment in rush hour traffic, and we can rely on the timing of that. So as I said, that work is well underway. So I just wanted to brief you on that. Participation fees, I did assemble a small internal working group to consider the many aspects of participation fees. So there's fee structure issues, and there's a number of different ways to do that. Family caps, collections, timelines, a mechanism for appeals for extenuating circumstances, consideration for free and reduced lunches. But what in essence we want to do, and there was generally two ways to approach this, to achieve some level of savings, a material level of savings that we'll need as we head into year 1 of our 3 years, possibly more, of significant cuts. And that is to reduce the number of opportunities would be a way to do that. And then that would minimize or eliminate participation fees, or keep the same level of opportunities in sports and clubs and charge a participation fee. So as we are considering every aspect of this that we can think of, as with any decision, there are going to be pros and cons to whichever choices we make. And so we need to weigh those pros and cons to make the best decision that we can. And that's what we're in the process of doing. And we're off to a very good start on gathering the data, understanding the participation, and understanding the different price points and fee structures and what that would yield. So you'll be hearing more on that. The governor's budget address is scheduled for Tuesday, February 25th, and as Dr. Samspon said, they're required by statute to let districts know what their state aid is within 48 hours of the governor's budget address. Now the governor has the flexibility to move that budget address back, and very often they do. So we may be in a position where we don't know our state aid until the middle of March. I don't know what the plan is. Currently it's scheduled for February 25th. Within 2 days of that, we'll see exactly where we stand. The other things to just mention as we move through our budget development process, each of the administrators are planning and designing their budgets for their particular areas of the operation, and that's coming to us. We have collective negotiation agreements that come due, that are under negotiations now, and that's three different bargaining units that we're working on. But something, and here's where I want to make a really clear distinction, because I don't know that everybody separated properly the issue of S2 and reduced revenue and a referendum for infrastructure, roofs, paving, that type of thing, two of which have not been successful. Passing a referendum does not solve the S2 problem. A referendum that does not pass amplifies the S2 problem to the tune of add another 5 million a year for 4 years. So where we're saying 6 to 10, 6 to 10, 6 to 10 in reductions, it'll be more like 10 to 15, 10 to 15, 10 to 15, right? So, which makes it a monumental task. We are working with the architect to further cull down our list of absolute priority items, look at alternatives to a traditional approach. For example, roofing, it's tear off and rebuild. There's an assembly, there's a roof assembly, it's a number of different layers of different material. But some of the roofing companies now are offering some are a roll-on right over the existing, or it could be applied in a liquid form, but offering 20-year warranties on that. So we're looking closely to that. It's a relatively new technology, so but it's significantly less expensive. So any areas like that that we can explore, we're certainly doing as we consider options for facility infrastructure improvements that are not going to be contained in the annual operating budget, okay? As I said, if we're considering a third referendum and any other possible funding scenarios, but if we're unsuccessful with that, then it does fall into that annual operating budget. And then those numbers of hardship year after year, they raise significantly. I think that's really, those are the main aspects of budget development and the status of them. So, I just wanted to make you aware of that. Just one more comment on the courtesy busing. Many of the K-8 districts have some form of courtesy busing in place. And they're elementary districts, right? So from kindergartners up to 8th grade. And although a district is free to do whatever they want with giving consideration for bus stops and the like, and for courtesy busing, many of those districts, because of their little ones, have come up with systems to determine if it's safe for a kid to walk to a bus stop at this place. Are there sidewalks? What's the volume of traffic? What's the speed limit on the road? Things like that, point systems to make a determination. We have, and we've shared this with the administrators of the municipalities, we have no plans to consider hazardous routes in any form. And there's also no plans to offer subscription busing, which is something that districts also do for those students that don't receive busing, is to facilitate separate runs for those kids at a cost, at a pay. Because freehold regionals, the high schools are so large, and our footprint is so large, it's almost cost prohibitive for us to consider that. Not to say that we're going to rule it out forever. We might see 1 year, see what the level of interest is for that, and consider it. But right now, it's not currently in the mix, either subscription busing or hazardous busing. And that's the way that we plan to proceed. Mr. Bruno?
So the hazardous busing route, you already know that. We know that for all the towns. That's something the towns know. We know that.
Well,
we know where they are.
Well, no, it's a different interpretation per municipality. The state literature says Board of Educations are not required by law to provide busing for students who live less than remote, so less than 2.5 miles from school, even for safety reasons. So the state has pretty much taken that off the table. And as funding goes, there is some funding that districts receive for transportation. They don't count courtesy students in that. So there would be no change in funding as a result of that, just a change in cost.
So, like, I ride my bike around this area a lot, so there's a lot of hazardous bike roads, you know, by interpretation of hazardous, but, so when we do the courtesy busing routes, that's gonna be part of it?
No, there will be no courtesy busing routes.
Okay. So there'll be no busing for even the hazardous areas?
Correct. Hazardous it's very subjective. You know, it broadens responsibility to other areas of the community, but for the district, that, you know, there's no requirement to bus students who are within the 2.5 miles, even for safety reasons.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that for people who do, or students that do get bused, they're gonna have to walk further to the bus stop?
Yeah, we're going to try and make them more sensible. I mean, right now, our policy states that you can have a student walk up to 1/2 mile to their bus stop. So, and in most cases, it's far less than that. So if you have a neighborhood that's, a hypothetical neighborhood that's fairly self-enclosed, we may have those kids, which some of the K-8s are already doing, and that just makes our run more efficient time-wise.
But the 1/2 mile is Freehold Regional's policy?
Yes.
Does the state have any regulation?
My interpretation of it is the state is saying a kid can walk 2.5 miles.
Within its boundaries? Okay.
And we don't have a policy, the Freehold Regional is 2.5, that's our policy.
No. So policy-wise, the policy will reflect the decisions that we make. It doesn't determine our decisions. It is a reflection of our decisions.
And Mr. Boyce, just to clarify, the 2.5 mile radius Mr. Boyce is referencing, that's set by the state. The state makes no determinations or limits as to bus stops. Bus stops is local decision only.
So one correction, and I had flipped the vans, buses being purchased, not purchased. So we have 15 vans that are aging out, we're buying 3. We have 6 buses, large buses, aging out, we're buying 0. One of the problems with finalizing this is there are certain components that we don't know yet. Who are the students that got into the vocational programs, and where do they live, right? And who are the students that got into our own magnet programs, and where do they live? Because in both cases, they could live anywhere within that 200 square mile footprint. So we've anticipated, you know, having seats and looking at the numbers that do attend the vocational programs. So there's some assumptions in where we are in the process right now, and as we get that information, you know, we can finalize our transportation situation. So that concludes my status report on the budget. Perhaps when we see each other next in a public meeting, we'll have what actual state aid is, and perhaps we won't. But as it looks right now, that's, if the governor's address is on February 25th, then I'll know by the end of the month. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boyce, for
I had
your
a question.
presentation.
I
Okay.
had a question for Dr. Sampson. The letter you sent to the governor, is that public? Yes. Because the letter that the superintendent sent to the governor, I don't know if anybody saw it, it's excellent. And for me, I've been on the board for 3 years now, not always understanding S2 and try to explain to my people in my town about S2, it's not always easy to explain. And the letter that he did last week actually, it was so great to follow, easy to follow. If you can get a copy of it, I think it's probably on our website. It's so well done, it's so easy to explain to people. So, good job on that.
Sure.
The one more thing that I forgot to mention is that the budget that's currently under development includes no capital projects. So no roofing, no paving, none of that pocket of essential needs. So none of that is in there right now. And again, just to reinforce the idea, S2 and referendum are entirely different things. What I did hear routinely during the times where the referendum was being considered was, well, so if the referendum passes, then we're all good. No, if the referendum passes, then we are where I just described we were. If it doesn't pass, that's when things get ratcheted up to an even more extreme area that will deepen cuts and accelerate the timing of it.
Sean, so do you have a estimated price tag that you can put on not putting capital projects into the budget?
It's certainly not an ideal, not at all what we want to do, but we'll continue to Band-Aid them the best we can. And if the board decides to go forward with a November question, that decision will really direct us into one direction or another.
But do you have a dollar amount that would save if you left the capital projects out of the budget? How much money are we talking?
I would do at least $5 million.
Every year, basically.
We have 20 million that is imminent, and by that I mean must be handled within the next 3 years, 4 years, and much of that should have been handled last year.
Right. But let me just be sure I understand that you're saying in developing this budget, you are looking to leave those capital projects out of this budget.
That's correct.
Okay.
And the goal is to bring forth another referendum on election day that is purely the infrastructure, which is one side of the coin that Mr. Boyce is talking about, and S2 being the other side of the coin. I think it would be, I think it's a difficult position not to go forward one more time with some of these essential projects, because what often the sound bites out there don't fully capture is that we have 6 large high schools. Aside from Colts Neck High School, which is 20 years old now, there's not a building less than 50 or 60 years old. Freehold High School is 100 years old. The transportation depot that we have with our busing is fairly dilapidated. And the board office is a 100-year-old elementary school. So all of these things have general maintenance costs associated with them. And to give scale, one of the boilers went at Marlboro High School this year was $800,000. And so.
Yeah, just, and it's been said before, so many of you in the audience may have heard this before. We did a number of things over the past decade or so to really leverage subsidies and other state funding and mechanisms within the confines of our annual budget. All in an effort to align a referendum with the expiring debt. So the district only had one bond issue from 20 years ago. The final payment on that is in March, I believe. And so from a tax, this is counterintuitive, but the things that we're talking about here, there's 4.1, there's over $4 million of debt service property taxes that is going to disappear from the next budget presented to the community. So even with a 2% increase on the general fund, the operations levy, taxes are still going to go down in the district. The total tax levy will go down in the district next year because that 4.1 million debt service is no longer necessary. Had a referendum passed, it would have been aligned so that it would have been a smooth transition without spikes and peaks and valleys. So if we are successful in that referendum, the district will see a, slight tax decrease in next year, but then, year over year, then it would spike back up to the level which was anticipated to just seamlessly move from one bond issue to another. But, when we get to a point of promoting a referendum, we'll make all of that very